Asia, you're on mute.
Asia, oh,
Of course I'm muted. Like why would I not be unmuted? Anyways, hey everyone, happy Thursday, happy Friday Eve. I'm so excited for you all to be here with us. We made it to our last breakout session for this conference, so hopefully we can give ourselves some virtual applause. Today I will be presenting with my lovely and dear colleague Katie Griffith Rogers on Nature of the Work right now, building robust networks despite difference and scarcity. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to start off with a little bit of information about myself. So, again, my name is Asia Evans Kidd. I use the she series pronouns, and I serve as NOVA's Student Empowerment Program Manager. And I work with the OVW campus program grantees, tailoring their domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking efforts to be inclusive of culturally specific communities and highlighting and emphasizing student survivor voices. My professional experience, as you can see, is listed on the slide. I come from a student affairs background and I love working with students and elevating their voices and experiences. Students are so powerful, and that was something that really shaped my undergraduate and graduate experience. So I like to make sure I do the same for our current students. As a practitioner, my work is rooted in critical race theory, Black feminist theory, and racial identity development. And in the way that I support campus victim advocates, I focus on ensuring that advocates empower survivors of sexual violence and dismantle white supremacist undertones of violence response work. I utilize my passion for racial justice and bias disruption to guide me in supporting advocates and victims in their experiences. And now I'm going to turn it over to Katie so she can talk about herself.
Thanks, Asia. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Rogers. I go by she, her, hers, and I'm NOVA's Campus Coordinated Community Response, or CCR, Program Manager. And I serve as a technical assistance provider and trainer, and I specialize in all things teamwork, collaboration, organizing, capacity building, and that's specific to the field of preventing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking on college campuses. And so that's what I do. But in the day to day, I really draw upon my previous work. So I have about 9 years of experience working in student affairs at community colleges. And I just wanted to elevate that I have had a really formative experience. When I was in my 20s, I served in the United States Peace Corps in the country Botswana, which is in Southern Africa. And it was my Peace Corps service that I made the shift. At the time I was working with younger children and families, and I started to work with college students there. And it's in Botswana that I also started educating communities about preventing gender-based violence and how that can prevent the spread of HIV as well. So now that I've been back for almost a decade now, this month, I've been reflecting a lot on all the things that I've learned, how to truly show up for colleagues and friends, what it looks like for communities to connect with one another, and how to bridge these vast differences across language, culture, resources, even the conception of time, um, in order to make progress together. And those kinds of experiences have influenced how I provide support to other people, as well as what kind of presentations I give, like today. So let's think about what we're going to do together during our session today. We hope by the end of this session, you'll be able to identify barriers to building robust networks of colleagues and students. Identify barriers to building robust networks of colleagues and students on your campuses. Understand how some of the elements of nature and the natural world can provide wisdom for us, so we can encourage community members to participate at the level that they have capacity for right now. And finally, at the end, we're going to analyze some tangible examples to determine how to apply this strategy to your campus context. And another note, we just wanted to share that our slide deck is posted below in Whova, and you can download them for your reference. We also put in there how you can access a Padlet that we're going to do later. Okay, so a few acknowledgments and terms. We'd like to just review these before we get started today. So this presentation was created as an expansion of the work of the authors that are listed on the screen. So that would be Complex Movements, Adrienne Marie Brown, and their 2017 book, Emergent Strategy. And then that work sparked the formation of the Ideation Institute that further developed the emergent strategy with even more practitioners. So I'm going to use a lot of their own words to describe this important work and provide a little bit more context. So if you're not familiar with Adrienne Marie Brown, who goes by she, they, Adrienne is the New York Times bestselling author and editor. She's also a ritual singer-songwriter, has co-created tarot decks, been a podcast host, and is also just one of my personal heroes. And they say in their bio that they're growing a garden of healing ideas informed by decades of movement facilitation, somatics, science fiction scholarship, and doula work. And so emergent strategy is a philosophy, draws on the teachings from people like Grace Lee Boggs, Octavia Butler, as well as the natural world and complexity science. And it explores principles and elements that continually turn towards life and nature in the midst of violence and devastation. It is rooted in Black feminist, abolitionist, and anti-capitalistic thought with deep love for the earth and of life. And then Complex Movements is a Detroit-based art collective supporting transformation of communities, exploring the connections of complex science and social justice movements. And they have really cool multimedia interactive performance work. They came up with the natural elements emblems that we're going to be going deeper into today. And there are just so many ideas to unpack from these works. So Asia and I were really inspired to just take one small piece of emergent strategy and look at those elements from the natural world. And even just then, we're focusing on just 4 of them out of all the ones that are presented. And so there's just so much more to explore. But as you see, we have a really rich application that comes out of exploring the relationship between these movement spaces and our campus advocacy prevention work. And then to add to our conversation, Asia is going to be walking us through some culturally specific and intersectional lenses. We're going to be looking at the civil rights movement as foundational examples. And then one final note, we have a couple of terms on the screen. If you hear us use the acronym DVSAS, that is the 4 VAWA crimes: domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. And then CCR is Coordinated Community Response, which is a specific kind of disciplinary team. We provide training for campuses on how to build CCR teams. So you can just keep that in mind if you're interested in connecting with us outside of today's presentation. Now we'll just take a moment to introduce Adrienne Marie Brown so you can hear from them in their own words describe emergent strategy as getting in right relationship to change. And while you listen, I'm just going to paste in the chat some of the parts from this clip that really stood out to me.
Onboard those people who are new to you to.
Oh, my apologies.
Onboard those people who are new to you to your work. So I'm curious, and this might be a bit much to ask, but any current elevator pitch that you have for emergent strategies? I know you mentioned a few in 23, but is there any new ones that have emerged since?
The main thing I say about emergent strategy is that it's about getting in right relationship to change. The change is inevitable, and we struggle with the humility it takes to get in right relationship with it. But everything about emergent strategy is just being in that practice of like change is happening, it's coming, you're in it, you can shape it. And yeah. And what does that relationship really look like?
Could you expand on right relationship, what it means for you?
Yeah, I first heard it from Indigenous communities I was working with when I was at the Ruckus Society doing nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience training. And it was this idea that everything is in relationship with everything else. And I kept thinking about that there's a relationships between all things that are alive, all things that are in care and aid and support of each other. And that part of what Western culture does is it gets us into these relationships of transaction that can be very toxic. And in relationships where we try to simplify what is complex, or try to make a binary out of a fluid system. And so that idea of being in right relationship is a relationship where there's mutuality, where there's accountability, where things can actually flow. And I'm really interested in what it would look like for us as a species to be in right relationship with the planet, which means that instead of enforcing a kind of human supremacy where everything on this planet is meant for us to eat it and extract it and use it and put concrete over it. And instead, what does it look like to be in a relationship of listening, caring, nourishing, mutuality? What does it look like to be in a relationship of mutuality with the planet?
All right. So that's Adrienne. And hopefully now you have a better idea of what we're building upon. And so now I'd love to turn it over to Asia so you can walk us through our discussion about barriers next.
Thank you so much, Katie. So we have taken the time to set up kind of the foundation for what this conversation today is going to look like, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a dialogue. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to talk about how emergent strategy, how complex movements has shown up in past movements, and how we can incorporate it into our current movements and what that's going to look like on our campus communities. And so before we kind of get into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be discussing today, I want us to take a moment to discuss the importance of robust networks for this work, right? One office, one department, one employee cannot handle the load of this work. Two offices, two departments, and two employees cannot handle the load of this work alone. We all have a stake within this fight, right? And so we have to be able to trustingly, emphasis on trustingly, lean on our campus and our community partners to build a network of support and care for all student survivors. But, well, maybe not but, maybe I should say and we know that there are some barriers when it comes to working, collaborating, and making sure we continue the movement of this fight. Next slide, please. And so with that on the screen, you're going to see some common barriers that exist when it comes to building robust networks for student support. And so I want you all to look at some of these common barriers that we have. We have them listed in 3 different buckets. So first we have differences that exist. We all come to our roles, our jobs, our identities and spaces with different lived experiences, with power and privilege, with opinions and ideologies. And there might be a sense of institutional betrayal. I know that's come up several times throughout this conference and some of the sessions that I've been in. And so I might have a sense of institutional betrayal. Katie might not have that sense. And so it might cause a bit of an issue when we're trying to work together toward the same common goal. There's scarcity between time and workload. Okay, as someone who used to work in higher education, the sentence that says other duties as assigned, I kept hearing that pretty often as things were continuously getting assigned to my plate, right? Resources and funding is very scarce. Competing priorities, right? Well, I have to do an event That's a part of the curriculum for my job in res life, but I also want to be a part of a coordinated community response team on campus to make sure that we're bringing, DVSAS prevention initiatives to the appropriate places, right? But then within all that, there's a scarcity of energy and capacity because sometimes, I'm gonna be honest, y'all. Can I be honest in this space? I'm gonna be honest with y'all anyway, but I just figured I'd ask. Sometimes you just don't have the energy. Sometimes you don't have the capacity. And it's very important for us to be open and honest and transparent about that when we are working within these movements. Because when we're not open about that, when we're not honest about it, what happens is it shows up in our work, it shows up in how we care, it shows up in how we support student survivors, right? And that's not where we want it to show up at, right? And then the last bucket we have is engagement. So are students aware of the services that are offered? What does morale look like for students and staff? And another one that is not new to student affairs professionals, high turnover. And so when you have limited capacity, when you have a scarcity of time and resources, when there are different philosophical approaches and structures between campuses, between communities, or an overall lack of motivation, all of that tends to impact the way that we support students. So this is not an exhaustive list, and I'm curious to know if y'all could put in the chat, what barriers are you currently facing to building networks at your campus community? Check over in the chat. Or what is preventing you from getting engagement right now?
Aisha, do you want me to pull up the Padlet now?
Sure, yeah, let's do that. And then as you can see in the chat, Katie dropped a link to our Padlet, which is what we'll be using to garner today's conversation. And so it should take you to a page where you can create a new post or respond to the post that's already been created around what barriers are you currently facing to building networks in your campus community. So Emily says capacity of necessary departments. That's a good one. Significant oversights of those departments, their fear to engage in our work without repercussion in this climate. Yes, and Shannon touched on this. Shannon and Carrie touched on this in their previous presentation. But I think about how there's a lot of fear around the work that we do. And on one hand, it can feel, for me, in my most humble opinion, it can feel cool a little bit to be like, oh, I'm doing this work. I'm fearless. I have so much courage, right? But it is also a little frightening when people are putting your livelihood, the work that you do in the same sentence with illegal, in the same sentence as abolish, right? And so it's very hard to want to engage in work that might fail to exist in air quotes in a couple of years. Definitely my own energy levels and engagement. Also, as funding becomes scarce, folks don't have much time to engage in this work since it's considered extra for their jobs. Yes. We see that a lot of people are voluntold to do this work, and that is not helpful all of the time. Being new to the institution, both as a person and a department, yeah, that social capital can be missing as a new person at your school, within your community. People seem to really love the silos that exist, which is baffling to me. Listen, I hear that. Everyone likes to stay in their lane and only operate in their lane. But I think, no, I don't want to get too far into the presentation, but I think we're going to talk about some strategies to kind of work with that instead of working against it. So thank you all for putting some information into the Padlet. I will turn it back over to Katie.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you all using the Padlet as well. We just wanted to let you know that you can continue putting things up there throughout the presentation to get today or even after. Okay. So let me do this. Okay, back to the presentation. Okay, so far we've taken a deeper look at some of our core problems, and you're thinking about the barriers that you're facing to building networks in our campus communities. So the solution that we'd like to explore is building networks using an adaptive framework where we're going to meet people where they're at, thinking about what your partners can feasibly participate in right now. So we want to use this strategy for any student, staff, faculty, or community member, and every single person is welcome. And not only is there space for everyone in this movement, but no one person's advocacy is going to look the same, which is going to make our movement stronger. So for this exploration, we're going to be using something called biomimetics or biomimicry, which is imitating our models of problem solving using inspiration from nature. And so we are from the natural world. We are humans, we are animals, so we can organize like the natural world. And again, we just want to shout out complex movements. I'm actually going to drop the source material into the chat so you can see the diagrams that they put together. And we're going to go through 4 of their 6 emblems. So as we build our networks on campus, they're going to be based on the level or the type of participation that people have capacity for right now. And so we're going to look at the highest level of involvement. So that would be leading and organizing, all the way to the most accessible, the least that they would need to do, which is just showing up or just providing support in sometimes big ways, but in sometimes it's in small ways. And by doing that, our hope is that our movement would be more inclusive, robust, effective, and ultimately sustainable. So here's a link for you if you're curious. All right, let's get into it. And I do have a cat that wants to be seen. So if you see an orange figure appearing, that is my cat Solo. All right, so let's start with the first kind of level of organizing. We're drawing inspiration from something called mycelium. And this is also like new vocab for you today, in case you didn't know some of these terms. But so mycelium is the most expansive and complex type of participation we're going to explore. So this would be organizing or co-organizing. And so mycelium is the fungi that is a network of interconnected branches that transport nutrients like through the trees. It's actually, when you look at all the mycelium together, it is the largest organism on Earth. And so the mycelium grows underground in thread-like formations, connecting roots to one another and breaking down plant material. And ultimately, that's creating these healthier ecosystems. Okay, one moment to reposition my cat. All right, so when we look at campus communities, we're teaching them how to build CCR teams. We often say, and I think Asia mentioned this before, like not one person or not one department can do this alone. So even if a campus like yours doesn't have a CCR team, you still might want to build a strong network of partners so that the work of ending violence on your campus doesn't fall solely on the shoulders of the advocacy or counseling or prevention department. And so that having that robust network requires commitment from many different departments, community agencies, and disciplines, and you're all working together with one vision, communicating continuously and meeting together to work on strategic initiatives. So we could think about our movements being like mycelium, where we're interconnected and we're committed together to making our campus a healthier ecosystem. And I also love this metaphor of mycelium for our specific kind of organizing, because as prevention educators, we're breaking down concepts and we're deconstructing terms. We're making sure our work is healing and restorative, just like the mycelium are doing. And one article I read actually says that without mycelium, forests wouldn't actually thrive. And we can think about the same applying to us, that our campuses wouldn't thrive, or our campuses depend on the well-being of us. The, our campuses depend on us to have a better well-being. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Asia now so you can walk us through an example of this.
Yes, thank you so much. Now, before I get into this example, I want to tell y'all a little story. And it's not really a story, it's more so my experience with this presentation. Hopefully, I have time to do it, but if not, we'll make the time. I'll keep it short. So, when Katie first came to me with this idea for this presentation, I was looking at her like, girl, what am I supposed to do with this, right? I am not the nature girly. I am not the environmental girly. I grew up in the country, but I was like, hey, like I didn't even know how to pronounce mycelium. I was like, what's going on? Like, why are we just not saying birds? Like, come on now, right? So I was like mad confused. And then I started thinking about, I started reading up on emergent strategy. I started reading up on all of the lovely resources that Katie is dropping for us. And I was starting to think like, how can we make this like, how can I make this relevant to me, right? Not in the sense that, you know, the world, nature is not relevant to me, because it is and I exist there, but how can I kind of like scale it back a little bit and bring it into what's at the forefront of my mind. And I immediately started thinking about the civil rights movement. And so I kind of want to take us on a bit of a storytelling journey within this presentation, about how we can connect the civil rights movement to nature and how we can pull this stuff into what we do on our campuses. So when Katie was talking about mycelium, it's very important for us to think about that organizing and co-organizing space. And so there's two ways for us to think about mycelium in history. The first is as a singular person. And so when we consider the role of a single individual within a movement, someone who can inspire, someone who can organize, someone who can delegate and mobilize other people, Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, stands out to me as a very powerful example of this. His activism began early when he joined the Freedom Rise that was organized by the Congress of Racial Equity, also known as CORE. These rides challenged segregated interstate travel, and Ture was among some of the young activists who were arrested down in Jackson, Mississippi, for refusing to give up his seat. And so his courage during this time marked the beginning of lifelong leadership for him. And so his commitment to dismantling racial discrimination deepened, and Kwame transitioned from participating in direct actions to being the organizer and to leading those actions. And so he became active in regional campaigns across the South, where he learned to coordinate volunteers, build coalitions, and support local communities in voter registration drives, political education, and grassroots mobilization, which we'll talk a little more about when we talk about student activism. And so ultimately, Kwame Ture, his capacity to lead and empower others culminated in his election of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as the SNCC. And as chair, he helped guide and amplify student activism across the country, which influenced a lot of the initiatives that we know as the Black Power Initiative, as well as the Greensboro ANT4, which we will be talking about a little bit later. And so his leadership demonstrated how one individual, as a mycelium, not working alone, but serving as a catalyst, can help shape decentralized, youth-driven movements in a broader force for justice, right? But then we can also think about mycelium as establishing a network or system. And so when I'm thinking about the civil rights movement and I'm thinking about successful social movements, it's not only the charisma of the leaders, but it's also the creation of robust and flexible networks. Exactly. And these robust, flexible networks, they allow people to sustain long-term action. And so for me, I started thinking about the Montgomery bus boycott as a prime example of this kind of decentralized but highly coordinated level of organizing. So when Black residents in Montgomery, Alabama refused to ride the buses due to segregation, they stopped that for over a year. And so they had to create alternative transportation infrastructure from scratch. So we were seeing communities organizing informal carpools, volunteer driving systems, walking buddy networks to make sure that workers could travel safely and collectively. And so this is where we saw local churches being used as essential hubs, restaurants and homes served as areas of informal planning, and even Black taxi drivers contributed by reducing the fares of their rides. In a way to create an affordable parallel transit system to the public transportation at the time. And so these interconnected efforts formed a resilient support system that allowed thousands of people to participate in the bus boycott. And so the success of the Montgomery network illustrates how social movements thrive when communities develop systems, whether it's formal or it's informal. And that empowers participants, it distributes responsibility, and it reinforces collective impact, which is something that we talk about a lot at NOVA. So what is the campus connection? So it's like, all right, girl, you gave us all the history. That's great. How can we bring this back to campus? So campus-based professionals can draw from civil rights leaders like Kwame Ture by empowering student advocates to take initiative, build teams, and cultivate new leaders who strengthen survivor-centered networking and prevention efforts. And similarly, the movement's network-based organizing, like the Montgomery bus boycott, shows how creating interconnected systems of support, communication, and collaboration can sustain long-term community-driven change on campus. Katie, can you give us a little more information on what that could look like on campus?
Yeah, let's get super practical here. And just a quick note about this, as I was thinking, for those of you that would like to take this material back to your campuses, there's 4 key slides that we're going through, and this is the first one. And if you just shared this with your campus community and asked to see if do you see yourself as an organizer or the other ones that we're going to go through, this is probably the most practical part for y'all. So to build our mycelium, we need to recruit people who have the capacity to lead, plan, and network with us. And so mycelium organizers, they have responsibilities that can be delegated to them. And it's even better if they can initiate these strategic actions on their own. But what does organizing actually look like? Well, here on the screen, we've just listed a couple tangible ways that people can organize with us. They can become members of our multidisciplinary or CCR teams. So what this actually means is people who have the capacity to come to meetings, they have a seat at the table, and they're contributing to that shared work that happens during those meetings. They can lead a subcommittee or an initiative outside of those regular meetings. They can assist with network building, and they can bring others onto the team to make it more robust and representative. They have the time and energy to show up. They can help plan and implement events, programs, or trainings, and they can co-create curriculum or resources with us. And so sometimes these co-organizers are actually out there. You don't know that they actually do want to be more involved. Some people are really motivated by the passion of the work that they have, like a faculty member. They might have some overlapping subject matter, or they might be part of student affairs and they organize activities for students. But sometimes your co-organizers, your mycelium, are part of the network because it's embedded into their role. So think Title IX coordinator, public safety director. And as many of you know, just because someone's specific title or role on campus is what it is, it doesn't automatically guarantee that they will organize with us. So that's why it's important that we have other options for meeting them where they're at. Okay, so we built these little mindful moments into our presentation to give ourselves a collective breath because we've covered a lot of information and concepts. So we're just going to take a short minute to breathe, reflect as we watch. We're going to watch some mushrooms that are in time lapse. So feel free to check it back in with a Padlet or just reflect, be quiet and present. Okay, let's go to the next one. So our next element of the natural world is starlings. These are beautiful birds, and they specialize in a specific synchronized movement pattern known as murmuration, another vocab word for you today. So David Tipling says that a murmuration is not random motion, but it's actually synchronized decision making. And so each bird aligns itself with its neighbors, it's usually between 6 or 7 birds, and they match speed and direction. They make sure they're spaced in a certain way. But the thing about a murmuration is there's no central leader. And so they're self-organizing and they're coordinating with one another. And so starlings react to their environment without that central leadership orchestrating their choices. And they create these mutual relationships, this network that becomes this larger flock. I'm so glad, Jennifer, that you like murmurations. We're actually going to show one here in a couple moments. So let's apply this metaphor of murmuration like starlings to our campus movement. We can imagine collaborating with our colleagues in more of a decentralized way outside of a committee, making sure that there's a mutual agreement and partnership where everybody benefits. And so we'll look at like what would it look like to collaborate with a colleague that's maybe they do want to stay more in their specific lane. And that's what they have capacity for right now. So I'll turn it to Asia to give us another example.
All right, so one thing I feel like I love to say is that I love staying in my lane. Like, as long as I'm in my lane and I can do something that makes me feel comfortable to help support you, that's where I can thrive. And so, in thinking about this, I couldn't help but think about the National Urban League, which is formerly known as the National League on Urban Conditions Among Negroes. And it's a civil rights organization that was dedicated to economic empowerment, equality, and social justice. And so, in the early advocacy efforts, that's not even a word. In its early advocacy efforts, there we go, the National Urban League worked with the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration to address racial inequalities within federal policy, which contributed to the establishment of the Department of Commerce's Unit on Negro Problems. And so this unit sought to examine and respond to the economic challenges that were being faced by the Black community at the time. And so the organization also played a critical role in supporting the early planning for the March on Washington, which originally began as the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And so this effort also helped spur the creation of the Fair Employment Practices Committee, which we know as FEPC in 1941, which was a federal body that aimed at prohibiting racial discrimination in government employment. And so, because the National Urban League had its expertise and its mission centered around particularly the issues of businesses, labor, and economic justice within the Black community, their broader contribution to the civil rights movement was rooted in staying in its lane of kind of focusing on that economic development, focusing on businesses, focusing on racial discrimination within the job force, right? But also being able to collaborate with and support parallel efforts of the greater civil rights movement by focusing on political rights, legal equality, and grassroots activism. And so this specialized role allowed the National Urban League to deepen the movement's reach by addressing the material conditions that served as an underpinning of racial inequality. And so the connection to the campus work is that the model of the National Urban League focusing on its strengths with economic development and justice while collaborating across the broader movement parallels how campuses can structure their domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking work, with each office or group contributing to its specific expertise. So by coordinating roles like counseling, Title IX, peer advocates, student organizations, advocacy and response, campuses can create a more unified, survivor-centered network that can strengthen prevention and response efforts. Slide, Katie, that's all you.
Okay, so this is another one of those slides that you can totally duplicate for your own purposes. So let's talk about starlings as collaborators. When I'm consulting with a campus about how to better engage with or get buy-in from their campus, which is like one of the most common questions that I get, my number one recommendation is to find a tangible entry point. And for a lot of people, a tangible entry point isn't joining another committee or team. And that's just the reality of it. And it's not because we're not great, because we're fabulous. But it's that they perceive that organizing and planning is a lot of work. So what if we worked with that? If we started from what they could contribute in their individual roles instead? And actually, I just had a conversation with a campus about this, about how they were kind of like feeling down about, one of the departments on campus doesn't come to their meetings. They have a multidisciplinary team. But actually, she knows if she picked up the phone and was like, hey, can you help me with this? Like anybody from that department would. And so that's actually still a really strong measure of a collaborative partnership. And I just want to highlight that. So, to create the momentum of a murmuration of starlings, we want to empower people to partner on initiatives that are woven into their existing roles on campus. And so, what can those starling collaborators do? They can host an event in their department or class. They can be the ones that they have the audience, and you are invited in. They can provide access to networks and audiences that you wouldn't normally have access to. They can work together with you to establish a referral process or a protocol with their specific department. Or you all can implement an initiative that doesn't require like larger committee participation. And so you have a targeted goal, and the meetings that you all have are short term and they're focused on a specific thing. And even better, if you start doing an activity and you know you're going to do it every quarter, you're going to do it every year at this time. And so, Aja, did you want to provide any more context on this one? Or you can?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to collaboration, it's really important to find ways to intersect roles in the work to help build a sense of belonging and connectedness to the work. And oftentimes we hear the phrase sense of belonging, the phrase connect, talking about students, but connectedness and belonging are not just for students. It's also for staff. And I know for myself, feeling connected to the work, feeling like there's a place for me at this particular table, right? It's going to be something that's very important to me, and it helps me show up in the ways that I want to show up whenever I'm doing insert assignment. And so how can staff feel safe, or what can you do to make sure that staff feel safe to show up in spaces and ask questions? And there is the overarching that sometimes it's just about the space. Sometimes folks just don't feel comfortable in certain settings, and that's okay too. But being able to ensure that you do your part to ensure that folks can show up as authentically as they can in spaces is important. Be able to use some of the similar strategies that you use for students for staff, because at the end of the day, trust supports transparency. And so if I can't trust you with my ideas, my concepts, with my work, I'm not going to be super transparent with you. I'm going to keep our relationship surface level. I'm going to keep my work surface level. I'm going to come, do my 9 to 5, and go home. I'm not going to interact or engage. And that is something that we cannot afford to have in this space right now, because it leads to negligence when we're supporting students and survivors. So being able to work with folks on how they want to show up is super important in this movement right now.
Thank you for that, Asia. This is probably my favorite part. Y'all get to see the murmurations now. We're going to take another moment to rest and digest all this discussion with a video, and this is going to compile some murmurations for us. So take a moment to breathe or just catch up with your mind. Asia, you said what I was thinking. I was actually watching this video earlier and getting kind of emotional. I think it's the music, but I was like, this is our movements. And I was wondering if any of you out there were connecting with that too and seeing your work in the form of, of this kind of pattern. Because I see it for sure. Um, all right. Well, let's keep it moving. Okay, next we have ants and bees. We're going to talk a little bit more about participating and showing up. So we're actually expanding upon the work of complex movements because they highlighted ants, but we thought bees were really important too. And so ant societies function through individual acts. They're acting collectively in accordance with like their simple local information. They're doing their specific duty, but it relies on the work of the other ants around them. There's actually no master or queen ant overseeing the entire colony and broadcasting those instructions. And this actually applies to bees as well, which is when we put together this presentation, something that I learned about bees, because I was like, oh, but there's a queen bee. But actually, the queen bee isn't the queen because she's in charge. She's not like ordering all the other bees around. They're just protecting her because she has a really important job of reproduction and she lives longer than they do. So she's just kind of like part of the whole system that's going on, because she lays up to 2,000 eggs a day, I think. So there's just like a lot of workers doing their work collectively at once in the hive. And all that to say, what we want to illustrate here is the collective work that insects and bees do, and something that's like more of a non-hierarchical participation. They're showing up, they're doing their work. And so just to clarify, okay, well, how is this different than the starlings that we just looked at? Well, we have the scale. So starlings are a little bit bigger than ants and bees, for starters. And just like that, we have probably more people that are going to be participating on this level than we have on that collaboration level. So there's like the size difference there. And then there's also the influence. So for starlings, we're thinking about those folks who are leaders that can collaborate with us. And then for the ants and the bees, we're thinking about involving everybody from the campus community. All right, so now let's make it a little bit more practical, and I'll turn it back over to Asia.
And this whole time I'm like, oh yeah, queen bee, like that's me. Like actually now that I know what that means, that's not me because I'm not laying 200 eggs a day. And now I have to go back and kind of just let's forget that part, right? So again, this presentation has had me learning a lot about nature. And I feel like a lot of the times we hear colloquially calling somebody a worker bee as an insult, right? And I'm gonna tell y'all, it's not an insult. So many of the people who joined sit-ins, marches, boycotts, and voter registration drives throughout the civil rights movement were community members and students who simply chose to just show up in whatever ways that they could. So, like ants in a colony, each person's small localized action, whether it was sitting at a lunch counter, handing out flyers, driving someone to register to vote, or marching for a short or long distance, it became a part of a much larger effort without the need for a single central commander, essentially. So movements grow when individuals decide how they can contribute and trusting that their participation connects and strengthens the work of others. And so, just as ants and bees operate through shared responsibility rather than a top down direction, the civil rights activism throughout the movement relied on people taking initiative, supporting one another, and sustaining the movement through decentralized but deeply interconnected action. And so, what does that mean for campus? This connects to the campus work by showing that prevention and response don't depend on a single office or a single leader, but on many individuals taking small intentional actions, just as the civil rights movements that were strengthened by collective participation. When students, staff, and faculty each show up in the ways that they can, that they have the capacity for, that they are interested in, they create a more connected and sustainable community-driven approach to supporting survivors and preventing harm. Again, similar to the starlings, but in a bit of a smaller capacity. And so, Katie, can you give us some specific examples of what this might look like on campus?
Sure. So we want to generate as much participation as possible in our movements, and we want to invite people to just be present, and that contribution is enough. It's actually more than enough. It's really, really valuable. So this is empowering everybody to see their own autonomy, that they get to decide where, when, how, and if they show up. So your participant ants and bees are the ones who are attending your events, programs, and trainings. They are also the ones who are seeking advocacy, victim services, or reporting options. And we want them to walk away from the learning spaces, all the spaces that we create. We want them to walk away feeling empowered with new skills, resources, and inspiration, because that actually has an impact on the movement. They could bring this information back to their micro communities. And we want to remember also that participants apply to students, but they also apply to staff, faculty, and community members as well. And you never know when something is going to be inspiring enough in your program to spark that person to want to get more involved when they have that capacity to. So think about how you're intentionally opening up those opportunities for them to collaborate with you when they're ready. And so this could be a student who participates in an event, moving from a student participant to now a student leader who's helping with a specific initiative, or a staff member who attends one of your trainings, but then they later become a staff member that hosts a training in their department. All right. So we have the third interlude that I don't think we're going to have time for today, but if you wanted to access our slide deck later, you should be able to just click on the video so you can watch the bees making honey, if that is going to add some joy to your day. So we have time to do our last one. We're going to breeze through this one a little bit quicker. But it's very important, just as important as all of them. But this is dandelions. This is our fourth and final element, and we're going to explore the lessons from dandelions in how they show us how to support and spread the movement. And so some fun facts about dandelions: they have a tiny parachute on them that allows them to be carried up to 5 miles across an area, and they're very resilient. So they can survive even after the top part is burned away. We have a connection to some of our other elements as well. So bees show up because flowers, when the dandelions are yellow, that's actually to attract bees. And then they transfer the pollen to other plants. And then again, like mycelium, we see medicinal properties in the dandelion. So they might look like they're weeds in our backyard, but they're actually fairly nutritious and they can be used for herbal remedies. And finally, they're good for our environment. So they help with pollution reduction. They help absorb things like excess nitrogen in the soil. And this happens when they die after flowering. So in using this metaphor of dandelions, we can ask, who can spread the message and the spirit of our movements further than we could have ever imagined? And how will their contributions impact our work years from now? And also, how do they infuse healing into our movement spaces? So back to you, Asia.
So I put into the chat that this was my favorite one because I definitely saw a little bit of myself in this one. I was like, ooh, I'm a dandelion. And so what is important for us to know here is conversation around championing versus disrupting. And so dandelions are often mistaken as a weed and aggressively removed, but are hard to uproot. The top is pulled, but the long taproot stays in the ground and resprouts. And so that is something that hit me very hard as I was trying to make sense of today's presentation, and as I was trying to, kind of diversify the way that I think about my identities, how I show up, the movements of my people. And that resonated really hard. And specifically being mistaken as a weed and then aggressively removed, right? And sometimes, being seen as disruptive versus championing. And, that's something that I feel like we can apply to the movement to end violence on campus. And so champion supporters can have significant influence on policy and decision making. And then student leaders and activists can speak out and catalyze change. And so the long taproots of dandelions able to symbolize just how complex movements persist despite the opposition. Leaders and supporters of those movements are resilient and they use their influence to shape policy and decision making, right? And so that is what is very important for us in this space. And so I want to take a minute to just hold that because that was something that resonated with me a lot. Next slide, please, Katie. So to kind of bring us home, I want to talk about an act of civil disobedience that is local to where I am. I'm currently in Greensboro, North Carolina. And so colloquially known as the Greensboro Four, but we're starting to call them the A&T Four because these four men went to North Carolina A&T State University. The Greensboro Four, A&T Four were four young Black men who staged the first sit-in at Greensboro. And all four of these men were students from A&T, and they were influenced by nonviolent protest techniques practiced by Gandhi, as well as the freedom rides that were organized by the Congress for Racial Equity, which I talked about earlier, CORE, back in 1947. So on February 1st, 1960, the four students sat down at the lunch counter at the Woolworths in downtown Greensboro, which is still here. And their official policy at the diner downtown was to refuse service to anyone but white folks. And so, although they were denied service, the four young men refused to give up their seats. The police arrived, but they were unable to take action due to the fact that they were being obedient and there was a lack of provoking. So the A&T Four stayed in their seats until the store closed, and then they returned the next day with more students from local colleges. If you're unfamiliar with the Greensboro area, we have a lot of colleges within a small radius. There's A&T, there's UNC Greensboro, there's Bennett College, there's Guilford College, there's Greensboro College, Winston-Salem State, Elon. There's a good amount of colleges here. And so returning with more students. And so by February 5th, they had around 300 students that had joined the protest in downtown Greensboro, which really just kind of paralyzed the lunch counter and really stopped a lot of other local businesses from operating. And so at the end of July that year, when many of the college students were on vacation, Greensboro Woolworths quietly integrated its lunch counter. And so to capitalize on the momentum of that integration and that sit-in movement, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, which I talked about earlier with Kwame Ture, was founded in Raleigh, North Carolina in April of 1960. So we had the momentum of the sit-in, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that was founded in April, and then by July, there was the quiet integration of the lunch counter. So, as you can see, this act of disruption led to the creation of the SNC, which organized the Freedom Rides, which helped organize the Freedom Rides that continued from the beginning in 1947 all the way through to 1965. And this is a full circle moment to just show how each level of participation creates the strength and the heart of the movements that make us who we are today. And each role is just as impactful as the next, and it serves a mighty purpose. Katie, can you give us some on-campus examples, please?
Would love to. We always feel like co-hosts. All right, so Dandelions, we want to find people that can help us with generating widespread support of our movements. And that actually requires us to communicate with as many people as possible who have influence in our campus communities. And so we need to find people that want to know when things are happening so they can be informed and then actually spread that information where we cannot. So an important thing for Dandelions is we want to provide opportunities for those folks to join our listserv and actually have a listserv where we're sending out regular updates. They're subscribing to our newsletter. Where they will take that information and they will share that with their staff and their classes. And there's also people out there that they might not be able to show up, but they might bring their class to the event, or they might offer extra credit. There's also students that will go and bring their friends to different events. So finding those folks that can be those dandelions. And then there's people in positions of power that can advocate for funding or key decisions that are part of our movements in spaces that we are not in. So we don't want to forget about that as well. And so, like Asia said, really capitalizing on the student groups and the movements that they are building into your movements, such as protests or collective action, they can actually bring awareness in ways that we cannot. And so campus leaders will listen if there's a group of students that's advocating for something. And that's really important. So at this point, Asia, let's do a quick time check. We've gone through all of the different levels of participation and all of our emblems. We do want to make sure we have time for questions. So if folks want to keep using the Q&A part of the chat, that would really help us to know what other questions are out there. But Asia, I would suggest we do one of our case studies next.
Yeah, for sure. Let me just take a look at the Q&A. Okay, so no new questions. The main question that was there was around strategies being effective for cultivating strong, sustainable networks. So I hope that this entire presentation was able to give you some examples of those effective strategies. That was our goal. So hopefully we were able to attain that. Yeah, we can go ahead and move on to the case studies.
Were you thinking the first one or the second one?
Hmm. I'm going to go with mistrust from past missteps. I think that's a good one.
Okay.
So I'll read the case study, and you'll be able to see it here as well. And so we're going to talk about mistrust from past missteps. So after a high-profile case involving RAs, residential assistants, resident advisors, a student group formed to advocate for campus law enforcement to respond to reports of harm in a more trauma-informed way. This has increased tension between the campus police department and student leaders. The Residence Life Office wants to work collaboratively with both groups so that RAs can effectively respond to DVSAS, confidently call PD when an incident occurs, and maintain the relationships that they have with their fellow students. So within this case study, we want to think about how are both the student group, which are the Dandelions, and the campus police department, Mycelium, meaningfully contributing? And how can Residence Life leverage both groups? And as Katie and I were coming up with these case studies, this case study particularly was created off of something that I experienced at one of the previous institutions that I worked with. And one of the things working within housing and residence life was that we had relationships with our students, not only our student leaders who are RAs, but also the students who live within our residence halls. But we also needed to keep a collaborative spirit with the campus police. And so that was something that we really had to think about. Okay, how can we validate the experiences of our residents and our RAs while also maintaining this relationship with the campus police and also wanting to be in a transparent place with it as well. Does anyone have any ideas on how residence life could leverage both groups?
We must have come up with a really good question that was very thought-provoking.
Right, gotta be, because okay, thank you, Anna. I know for us in our campus context, it would be helpful to provide feedback directly to PD on behalf of students since we already have an established relationship and can frame it within conversations you've already had as a part of the CCR. Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Any other ideas or questions for this one?
Yeah, I was thinking about how we could potentially connect the students with campus police and put together some sort of training that might have some student voices built into it.
Absolutely. And Kitty just said, I wonder if hosting a training that covers trauma informed response and appropriate roles and responsibilities of each department could be of some help here. Absolutely. And I think a lot of times what can be missing in some of these trainings is being able to tailor it to the audience. So the trauma informed response training that I give to one department should not look the same as the other. Maybe not necessarily with some of the information, but some of the case studies or like the tangible examples that we're using within that. So the folks that we are, or the audience that we have, they're able to see themselves within the training material. O'Reilly says, create a safe space, do a town hall with questions. Or a town hall with campus law enforcement where students can ask questions and share their comments. Yes, and that's what we wound up doing at that institution. We had a town hall with our RAs and law enforcement, and things could have been done better, to be very honest and transparent. But I think it was a really good way for us to start the conversation in somewhat of a neutral space. It's kind of hard to find neutral spaces in that sense, but being able to have kind of that support from other professionals in that space for our RAs and our residents. So I like that idea, really. All right, well, that brings us to 3:59 p.m. So
Okay.
um, it means it's almost 4 o'clock. And that means that we have some information to share with you all. I'm going to kick it back over to Katie so she can do that.
Of course. So I wanted to just remind you that if you have a moment, I would love for you to look at the other case studies that we came up with. And these would be great to take back to your teams. I know some of the familiar faces on here might be working with CCR teams. So these are some things that you could work through together. But if you did not already know, we have a training specifically for campus advocates coming up, and we have a 10% discount right now. The slides will be in the like they are in below in the Whova app, so you can have this link. You can scan the QR code, as well as I can put the link in the chat as well. But I think we're closing down here in a moment. But if you would like to attend our training, it's the Puzzles 2025 is our discount, and it's a 30-hour, 7-week advanced training specifically for campus advocates. We'd love to see you there. And we want to thank you so much for participating, for being here today. We value your time, and we would love to connect with you in the future. You can reach us at campusta@trinova.org.
Thank you all so much. It was so nice to share space with you all today and see you all in the closing.
That was wonderful. Thank you both so much.
Thank you. Is the recording over?